Yeah, we have new starting running backs that we haven't seen before. So here are the top 70 rankings post injuries to help you submit your starting lineup this week. Tier 1 and 2, we don't have to talk about any of these players. We have a Barkley, Hall, Bijan, St. Brown, Lamb, Kamara, Gibbs, Chase, Jefferson, Collins, Connor, Mason, Taylor, Kyron, Cook, Smith, Wilson, Rice, and Ayuk. If you have them, you start them. Let's move on down. Marvin Harrison Jr. at 21. I am rooting against so much because my opponent in the Flock League just got a great value on him. But the reality is it's a phenomenal game environment going up against the Detroit Lions. There's an over-under over 50 points in this game against the Lions. So I think that we want to be in on this Arizona Cardinals offense. Obviously, Harrison had the absolute blow-up spot last week. He was a must-start guy for us. And yeah, I think he's just a must-start guy every week going into the future. Devontae Adams going up against Carolina. Yeah, you have Adams, who had a ridiculous amount of target volume a week ago, and now he gets to play a JV defense. Obviously, you start him. Tyreek Hill is a wide receiver that would be probably number 1, 2, or 3 in these rankings if you have Tua. And I know Tua gets a lot of hate. I know a lot of people don't like Tua. And maybe in terms of winning the Super Bowl, he's not that guy. But in terms of providing a ridiculous amount of passing volume and points scored in the regular season, Tua is a dramatic upgrade over what you're going to have now here in Miami. This is a severely capped offense. This is the issue that you have with some elite level receivers as well, such as Malik Nabers. So Tyreek, instead of being that high-end wide receiver 1 that he typically is, will be that high-end wide receiver 2/low-end wide receiver 1 until Tua returns. Derrick Henry at 24 with Josh Jacobs at 25. If Jordan Love plays, we flip Jacobs and Henry. Y'all know I spent the entire offseason screaming about how it was crazy people were drafting Derrick Henry over Josh Jacobs. The thing is, right now, even though Jordan Love did practice, I am operating under the assumption that Jordan Love will not be the quarterback for the Green Bay Packers against Tennessee. This should be a very high-scoring environment with the Baltimore Ravens and Dallas Cowboys. So I think you can start Henry. Obviously, you can start Jacobs because he's going to have every single touch out of this backfield. Just typically, the touchdowns are going to be severely capped when you're in these bad offenses. Going over to our next guy, we will be looking at Mike Evans and Chris Godwin back-to-back. Obviously, Baker Mayfield has been absolutely crushing it. Going up against Denver will be interesting to see what happens this week. Godwin's slot usage has been phenomenal, and Godwin obviously is the very top of total points scored at the wide receiver position currently. But I want to be kind of realistic here with these players. Now, going over to what we have with Zach Charbonnet. Zach Charbonnet was an immediate must-start play for us as a top 12 running back the second Kenneth Walker was ruled out last week. This week, we are operating under the assumption that you will have no Kenneth Walker. Walker hasn't been at practice. It seems like every resource that I look at, we are seeing that Charbonnet is going to be the guy. He will have almost 100% of the snaps here in Seattle. He will have all the work inside the red zone, and he'll have almost every single target out of this backfield. That is a running back that you want, especially going up against Miami, where right now the Seattle Seahawks are about 5.5-point favorites because obviously the Miami Dolphins offense should be very, very bad this week. We actually have a shot that Seattle is able to run the ball where they couldn't last week against the New England Patriots. Our next guy will be Travis Etienne with Etienne. I believe he's averaging 19 opportunities per game right now. It's not a great matchup going up against a pretty good Buffalo defense where you're actually expecting that Jacksonville is trailing in the second half. Now, obviously, Achane just absolutely crushed Buffalo with the receiving volume. But Etienne isn't close to being the talent that Devon Achane is. If you look at Underdog right now, you actually have higher, lower, 77.5 total yards for Travis Etienne, and that is going to be much lower than some of the other running backs that you see in this range. Now, going over to Chris Olave, on Underdog, Olave is higher, lower, 60.5 receiving yards. What's interesting is we've actually seen the implied team total for this New Orleans Saints offense get bet up as the week has gone on. Actually, the Saints are up to a 26-point implied team total this week against the Philadelphia Eagles. This should be one of the highest scoring games in the NFL this week. I'm actually kind of surprised to see this here, and I want to confirm that this data, what we're looking at, is correct. Because if we look at the very beginning of the week, this was pretty much a pick'em game between the Eagles and the Saints. And now it looks like the Saints are favored by a little bit of a gap. And yeah, the Saints are 2.5 3-point favorites in this game in New Orleans. Obviously, the Saints have been phenomenal. I really want to see what the usage looks like here for the receivers in a game that's actually close, where the past two have just been absolute blowouts. Now, Malik Nabers will be our next guy at 32. 100% Malik Nabers is a significantly better talent than Chris Olave. Let's get that on the record. And also with Malik Nabers, he will have a much higher target share than what Chris Olave will have in New Orleans. The issue is, this is a brutal matchup going up against the Cleveland Browns. If you're actually looking at the current projection when it comes to the touchdown scored by these players, you have Malik Nabers with a 1.77x multiplier to score a touchdown this week. Chris Olave down at a 1.35x multiplier. So Underdog does have Olave as a player that's more likely to find the end zone, because right now, if you were looking at sportsbook projections, you have the New Orleans Saints with an implied team total that is 10 points higher than what you have for the Giants. Now, clearly, Malik Nabers is a phenomenal player. Absurd what he was able to accomplish last week in a great matchup. You definitely want to start him, but I don't necessarily know if you can go all in to say he's a wide receiver one, because the touchdowns will be hard to come by in this offense. And you'll see with these rankings, yes, I'm always lower on the guys that are in absolute garbage offenses, even if they are extremely talented and even if they have the big names. But if you think, Mason, this is crazy, Malik Nabers has a great shot to score a touchdown, or Malik Nabers is easily going to have more than 65.5 receiving yards this week, you can find those picks over on Underdog Fantasy. The link's in the description, the link's in the comment section. If you use promo code FLOCK on Underdog, you'll actually get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you will get a free CD Lamb pick, more than less than half a total yard for the Sunday game. And you will get a free Patrick Mahomes pick, more than less than half a total yard for the Sunday night game. You'll get both, plus the deposit bonus. Plus, on top of that, you will get a free team review through flockfantasy.com and one of the live streams that we are hosting every single night. Just make sure you use promo code FLOCK on Underdog with the link in the description and comment section. Now, going over to our next guy, we will look at DJ Moore. I am making this ranking under the assumption that you have no Keenan Allen this week. What's actually funny is, if you look at DJ Moore, Underdog has him more likely to score a touchdown than Malik Nabers as well. His higher lower is 62.5 receiving yards. But with no Keenan Allen, you have the safe target share that you can project in Chicago. And I do expect that we are probably going to have some Caleb Williams improvement, even though Williams has been really bad this season. DK Metcalf will be our next guy at 34. With Metcalf, if you officially have no Kenneth Walker, I think you can actually bump him up. Obviously, last week, Metcalf was phenomenal. But at the same time, last week, you had 49 dropbacks from Geno Smith. I personally am expecting that this to be a much more balanced offense going into the future, especially against the Miami Dolphins, where they are almost touchdown favorites. So we'd assume that they are able to slow the pace of play down and actually run the ball in the second half here. And clearly, if you go to overtime, the overall volume statistics are going to get inflated. So I think that Metcalf, honestly, is probably going to come back down to earth just a bit. And if we look at Zay Flowers is actually only at higher lower 57.5 total yards in Underdog, higher lower 54.5 yards. It's very interesting to see the personnel usage in this Baltimore Ravens offense. After week one, I thought we were going to see a lot of 12 personnel. I thought we were going to see a lot of Andrews and Likely on the field at the same time, which would appear to cap the overall target share that you could have for Zay Flowers here with Lamar Jackson. We know that this is a team that wants to be run first. At least that's what we've seen every single year of Lamar Jackson's entire NFL career, regardless of who the offensive coordinator is. But last week, we actually saw Isaiah Likely run a route on fewer than 50% of Lamar Jackson dropbacks. So if that's going to be the case, I think the target share is a little easier project for Zay Flowers, but definitely something that we want to monitor in week 3. Now, somebody that I'm going to be very much in on this week, and an entire offense that I'm in on, as you can tell with these rankings. Yes, look at how damn high we have Jamar Chase. Zach Moss. If you have Zach Moss, you put him into your lineup. Now, obviously, if it's, do I put Zach Moss or Malik Nabers? Go Malik Nabers, of course. Look at the rankings. But I think more than half of y'all with Moss right now that have Moss on your bench should actually move him into that flex for Monday night. Going up against Washington, you have an implied team total of 27 points here. This is an absolute garbage Washington defense. We saw that with the Giants offense looking respectable this past week. You have a spread on this game that's about a touchdown, where we should assume that Cincinnati is able to run the ball consistently. You look at the snaps played for Zach Moss versus Chase Brown in this offense. While coming into the season, it appeared that it could potentially be a 50-50 backfield split. What we've actually seen through the first 2 weeks is, nope, that's not the case at all. This is Zach Moss's job. Zach Moss is the guy to go to in Cincinnati. Now, Moss has looked very bad. The offense has looked very bad. But if we're expecting the offense to be much better going into the future, which I personally am, if you look at the sportsbook data, it's telling you the same thing. I think that you have to go in on Moss. If you look at the underdog pick, Zach Moss is actually even odds to score a touchdown, which is significantly higher probability than what you have with, say, like Malik Nabers. Now, obviously, full PPR format, you go with the target volume. Now, Tony Pollard will be our next guy. With Pollard, I am operating under the assumption that Tajee Spears is going to be playing. If you have no Spears, for the love of God, please go out there and move Tony Pollard significantly, and I mean significantly up in these rankings. He's going up against the Packers. This should be a lower scoring game environment overall, where the Tennessee Titans are actually favored in this game. This is going to be one of the very few games that you find the Titans as favorites, operating under the assumption that you have no Jordan Love here, and they're able to run the ball consistently, including in the second half. I think you can make an argument that Tony Pollard should be higher than this in the rankings, even with Spears, but definitely without Spears, Pollard would jump up to probably being about 28 or so. Now, Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell will be our next two guys. Obviously, Diggs has had all the points here in Houston. Dell has had nothing, but Dell has had a considerable amount of target volume. Dell has a very high route participation rate. Y'all know I didn't like Tank Dell coming into the season, but honestly, looking at the underlying usage and the volume that Dell has had as a receiver here, I do expect that Tank Dell is going to be much better going into the future. As it looks right now, Joe Mixon didn't practice on Thursday, so I actually expect that Joe Mixon could very easily miss this next week's game. And if that's going to be the case, where Cam Akers does slide in to potentially being the starting running back, I think you may see the Houston Texans pivot over to be a little bit more of a pass-happy offense than what we've had through the beginning of the season. David Montgomery will be our next guy here. With Montgomery, super high scoring game environment, phenomenal offensive line. It's the same situation you've always been in though, right? Jahmyr Gibbs going to steal some of those touches at the goal line. Montgomery's not going to have anything as a receiver because Gibbs will have it all. Aaron Jones here at 42. Aaron Jones is also in a committee. Now he has probably a higher percentage of the high value touches in his backfield than what you're going to see with David Montgomery in Detroit. But the difference between David Montgomery and Aaron Jones is we are assuming that you have significantly more points scored in the Detroit Lions backfield in comparison to what you have with the Minnesota Vikings. Now, our next guy will be Rachaad White. Obviously, it's a great matchup for Rachaad White, but one, we saw the passing volume kind of go away this past week for White, where he didn't have the typical reception floor that you would have assumed. And two, Rachaad White has just been laughably inefficient all year, which inefficiency off a small sample maybe isn't necessarily something that we need to overreact about, because inefficiency off a small sample could actually swing in the other direction. But you actually seen Rachaad White, obviously 25 carries, 49 rushing yards this season, but also he was extremely inefficient last year as well. So this is a larger sample overall that you are dealing with. So I'm very much concerned with White. Going over to T. Higgins at 44. Higgins is practicing on Thursday. Obviously, I'm going to update these rankings on flogfantasy.com every single day until Sunday. I mean, even Sunday morning, we'll be updating these. So we will have more information for you. And if you can trust T. Higgins in your lineup, the issue that you're going to have is he plays on Monday night. So if T. Higgins is not cleared and good to go by Sunday, you can't trust him. I would go ahead and I would for sure bench him. But if we know that T. Higgins is 100% good to go, and we know that this should be a very strong offense and a very good matchup against Washington this week, if he's 100% good to go, I trust him in my lineup. Now, Jameson Williams will be our next guy at 45. It's a great matchup for Jameson going up against Arizona. Obviously, I've always operated under the assumption that Jameson is a field-stretching wide receiver. He can be a great NFL talent while at the same time maybe not commanding a ton of volume from a fantasy football perspective. But hell, you had 55 pass attempts for Jared Goff this past week. You had 3 targets for Sam Laporta. Jameson's currently top 10 in the NFL in total targets. So Jameson is getting volume because there's a ton of it to go around in this offense. It's a great matchup going up against Arizona as well, where the Detroit Lions are right up there with the Cincinnati Bengals in terms of the highest implied team totals this week. So I think you want to start as many Lions as you can. Looks like we had Jameson ranked way too low coming into the season, and he is penciled out to be a wide receiver 2 in this matchup. Amari Cooper will be the next guy here. Amari Cooper has also been a train wreck this season. If you look at Amari, he's had a ton of targets in Cleveland, where he actually is leading this team in targets, but Jerry Jeudy and Elijah Moore are kind of lapping him in other metrics. Amari has been the wide receiver 3 from a point scored perspective in this Cleveland Browns offense. Going up against the Giants, it's a decent matchup. However, hopefully we see the offensive play improve both with the O-line unit as well as at quarterback. Like we said, Amari has had the target volume. Despite Jerry Jeudy being the better fantasy asset through the first 2 weeks, I don't necessarily expect that to be the case going into the future. I do think you get a little bit of an Amari Cooper breakout here in week 3. Now going over to J.K. Dobbins here at 47. With Dobbins, I understand he has been incredible. J.K. Dobbins has arguably been one of the best late round picks / waiver wire pickups in all of fantasy football this year outside of Jordan Mason. Now, the thing with J.K. Dobbins, where I want to pump the brakes just a bit, is he has operated in a committee and he has not had a ton of receiving volume. J.K. Dobbins has 4 receiving yards through the first 2 games this season. And while, yes, he has been absolutely crushing as a rusher, it was against the Las Vegas Raiders and against the Carolina Panthers. So I do think that you could potentially see a pullback when it comes to the efficiency of J.K. Dobbins, while at the same time, you actually continue to see some volume going in the direction of Gus Edwards, even if Edwards has been a significantly worse running back while on the football field. And this is actually a really tough matchup for J.K. Dobbins going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers. You have an implied team total of only 17 points here for the Chargers. So as we stand right now, even though Dobbins is an absolute crusher and has looked phenomenal, I think it will be tough to get him in your starting lineup. Like, honestly, I am 100% on Zach Moss outscoring J.K. Dobbins this week. I feel like very, very confident in that. And I'm sure that there are some people watching this video that are currently planning on starting Dobbins and benching Moss. Now, going over to Michael Pittman. This is a wide receiver that has been in a super low volume passing attack where Alec Pierce has actually had everything. We'll be very interested to see if Josh Downs does end up playing this week. You actually have a higher lower over there on Underdog for Pittman of only at 50.5 receiving yards. If we want Pittman to succeed, what you're going to have to see is you're going to have to see significant improvement from Anthony Richardson. Now, this does currently project out to be actually a better offense than what we've seen through the first 2 weeks. You have an implied team total of 22.5 points against the Bears, but also you're playing the Bears, so there is that outside chance that the Indianapolis Colts really just lean on the run with Jonathan Taylor. Calvin Ridley will be our next guy at 49. If we are looking at Calvin Ridley, we'll be interested to see the continued expansion of DeAndre Hopkins' overall role in this offense. And also going up against the Green Bay Packers is one of the very rare instances where we should expect that the Tennessee Titans are actually winning the game in the second half, assuming that Malik Willis is under center. I don't think you're actually going to have too many plays run in this game because based off what we saw with Malik Willis and the Green Bay Packers last week, their game plan was, all right, let's run it and just drain the clock out and play game control. We don't need this to turn into a shootout. If it turns into a shootout, there's absolutely no shot to compete. Now, obviously, if we have Jordan Love playing, what I'm going to expect this to be a higher scoring game overall with more plays run as well. So in that instance, I'm probably a little bit more on Ridley. But as it stands right now, I am still expecting that Love will be on the bench. Now, Jackson Smith-Njigba was also a wide receiver that just got traded in the Flock League. We actually just dropped the video on that if y'all haven't seen it. And with JSN, he had the massive blow up last week. Led the team in targets, saw a career high with his snaps played, and he looks like a full-blown breakout. I'm very sorry. I said JSN was not startable week 1, said he was not startable week 2. I was waiting to see that breakout until we really considered him here for wide receiver 2 or the flex. But I think you can consider him now. It looks like Lockett is fading to the back. What I'm kind of concerned here is similar to what we have with Calvin Ridley. I don't know if the opposing team here for Seattle with Miami is actually going to be able to put up points on the board and force Geno Smith to have another 49 dropbacks, right? I think the passing volume may come back down in Seattle here. Going over to our next back, we are going to have Cam Akers. Looking at Cam Akers, I do not think he is that good, obviously. He's coming off a torn Achilles. I was expecting coming into the season until the very last preseason game that Dameon Pierce was going to be the guy over Cam Akers in Houston. I thought that you were to have an injury to Joe Mixon, Dameon Pierce would be sliding in. But now Dameon Pierce is dealing with his own injury. And with this, it is going to be opening up the door for Cam Akers to potentially come in and have a 3-down workload with no Mixon and with no Pierce. Now, Dare Ungabowale, I should probably know how to say his name. I mean, he's been in the league forever. Is most likely going to be the 2-minute drill running back. He's most likely going to be the third down back as well. So I probably shouldn't act like Cam Akers will be a bell cow. Akers will probably have work on first and second down, while at the same time having some targets out of the backfield on those scenarios. But I do want to reiterate as well that if Joe Mixon plays, obviously, for the love of God, you're not starting Akers. Now, our next two guys will be Waddle and Xavier Worthy. So I have Waddle in the Flock League. It is a very, very, very sad scene. And going back to what we're talking about with all these players in garbage offenses, you'll notice I'm lower on Nabers than most people probably this week. I'm lower on Achane than most people. I'm lower on Tyreek. I'm lower on Waddle. You go over to Underdog right now and look at the projections for how bad this Miami Dolphins offense should be. Right now, you actually see that Jalen Waddle is higher, lower 44.5 receiving yards. Tyreek Hill, higher, lower 66.5 receiving yards. You have a 1.1x multiplier for Achane to score a touchdown. On Underdog, the odds for Zach Moss score a touchdown this week are higher than Achane. Now, obviously, I'm not telling you to start Zach Moss. I'm just going to show that when you can only have so many points and so many first downs go around in an offense, because you have Skylar Thompson and just absolute garbage quarterback play, it's difficult to expect many first downs. It's difficult to expect many trips to the red zone. So if I could pivot off Waddle, I wouldn't mind it at all. Like we said, Waddle's a higher, lower 44.5 receiving yards on Underdog. I'm stuck putting him in one of my flex spots this week. I'm not really excited about it. I wish I didn't have to. Going over to Xavier Worthy. Worthy's also at like 44.5 total yards on Underdog. The difference is you're in a much better offense. There are going to be significantly more points scored in Kansas City in comparison to what we are going to expect in Miami. So I think Waddle may actually be the higher floor player because we've seen Waddle actually consistently have volume. Whereas in the case of Xavier Worthy, we really have only seen Worthy have 7 targets this season. With that being said, obviously as the big play potential, you all notice that Worthy is higher in my rankings this week than he was last because also you lose Pacheco. So I think the rush to pass ratio in this offense is actually going to get a little skewed and we may have more Mahomes dropbacks. Now dropping down to our next tier, we're going to have George Pickens. With Pickens, obviously he has almost every single target to account for in Pittsburgh. But the issue, going back to what we had with Waddle, going back to what we have with Nabers, is this is an absolute garbage offense. You have an implied team total of 18.5 points. Will be a tough matchup going up against the Chargers. Terry McLaurin in here at 54. Terry McLaurin's the guy I'm going to have to throw in my other flex spot this week. And I'd actually really like your opinion on this. Would y'all start Terry McLaurin or DeAndre Swift? I have to figure this out for the second flex. Terry McLaurin, higher, lower 46.5 receiving yards on Underdog. But the thing is, you're just not likely to get the touchdown with how this offense wants to run the ball and how we've seen the average intended air yards per pass attempt for Jaden Daniels be incredibly low. He is just kind of hanging it out around the line of scrimmage. DeAndre Swift is a running back that has a decent matchup going up against Indy. You have an implied team total of 21 points here for the Chicago Bears offense. Swift is actually up there higher, lower 73.5 total yards. So you know what I'm going to do right now? I'm actually going to make this swap. It's a full PPR format, but I think I am going to be starting DeAndre Swift over Terry McLaurin because it is a spot where we have seen running backs have success against the Indianapolis Colts. I think Swift should have some usage as a receiver out of the backfield as well. I started Swift week 1 and he only gave me 5 points, so it's definitely a scary situation. But yeah, for the time being, I'm going to put Swift in there over McLaurin. Please let me know in the live chat what you would do. I'm going over to our next receiver. We're going to look at Shaheed. With Rashid Shaheed, he has been phenomenal. You've had the big play touchdowns. If you're looking at his Underdog pick'em, he's actually at higher, lower 53.5 receiving yards. So honestly, the projections are higher on him than they are with guys like Waddle, Worthy, Pickens this week. So I think you can make a very strong argument that Shaheed is too low in these rankings. I don't know. I just don't want to be taking too much away from this New Orleans Saints offense through the first 2 weeks of the season. Obviously, they've dropped 40 points in both weeks, but we really haven't had the chance or the opportunity to see what this environment looks like in a normal game. This has been 2 games where they just get out to an early lead, they boat race their opponents, and maybe in a better game environment where they are having to keep things close, you're not getting the 3-4 touchdown game from Alvin Kamara. Kamara is not just running the ball over and over and over again. Maybe they have to air it out a little bit more and use Shaheed more than they would otherwise. I just think it's like the wild, wild west right now in New Orleans where I have no idea what to expect. I'm going to be a little more hesitant to just jam him in as a must-start player. Brian Robinson will be our next guy at 57. With Robinson, kind of know who he is, right? He's going to be losing some targets over to Austin Eckler. He's going to be losing some rushing touchdowns to Jaden Daniels. It's not a great offense, so it's hard to be that excited, but you do have a decent floor here. Carson Steele will be our running back at 58. If you are looking at Carson Steele, I just simply have no idea what to expect. I mean, I think we're going to have a much better idea after this week what the split looks like between all the running backs here in KC. Right now, it's Underdog Pick'em is higher, lower, 57.5 total yards. 100%, I think Steele, P. Ryan, Hunt, they're all worth roster spots, right? Steele would be my choice out of the three, but in terms of starting him immediately, I really want to see what the running back rotation looks like. I know what the running back rotation looks like in Pittsburgh with Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. Jaylen Warren played the same amount of snaps as Najee Harris this past week. It is a very bad offense here going up against a tough Los Angeles Chargers defense where the Steelers only have an implied team total of 18.5 points. So really not super excited to play either running back. Honestly, if you can sell Najee high, I'd probably look to do that, where Najee's had absolutely nothing as a receiver either. And it's just that tough matchup going up against the Chargers. Now, our next guy will be Jerome Ford. I hope you sold high on Jerome Ford last week. This week, obviously, everybody kind of realizes, okay, he's splitting with Deonta Foreman. I actually wouldn't mind taking Jerome Ford to have fewer than 71.5 total yards on Underdog, given the amount of snaps played by Foreman this past week in this Cleveland Browns offense. Obviously, you have some receiving usage regarding Jerome Ford, but I think he's kind of in a similar situation like DeAndre Swift, right? Where he's a running back that's in a committee that's going to have some receiving usage that is in a pretty bad offense that we don't think is like an elite level talent by any means. So I don't know. I think Ford is just not nearly as interesting now that you know he's in a committee here in Cleveland. Our next guy will be Brian Thomas Jr. Yeah, we actually, after week 1, moved Brian Thomas Jr. immediately over Christian Kirk in our rest of season rankings. And now that you are looking at what you have with Christian Kirk's volume this past week, I'm okay to just move Brian Thomas Jr. ahead of Christian Kirk in the weekly rankings as well. Kirk, -1 receiving yards. Obviously, this is a situation in which you have no Evan Ingram. So no Evan Ingram, you would expect a few more of these targets to actually be going to the receivers here in Jacksonville. If you look at the Underdog picks, they're all extremely close. Brian Thomas is higher, lower, 41.5 receiving yards. Kirk is higher, lower, 42.5. And Gabe Davis is higher, lower, 37.5. Khalil Shakir will be our next guy at 63. I do want to be on record. I'd still prefer having Keon Coleman rest of season here than Shakir. But I mean, if you're looking at what we've actually seen from Shakir so far this season, this has been a wide receiver that's had the majority of points in Buffalo. This is an offense that we still expect to be near the top of the NFL in total points scored. Keon Coleman has ran the majority of routes here and played the majority of snaps for Buffalo. And I think Keon Coleman has the most long-term upside. But if you're looking at the Underdog picks right now, you actually have Shakir higher, lower, 43.5 receiving yards. Keon down there at 36.5. Deontay Johnson will be our next guy at 64. Y'all know I'm not a Deontay Johnson guy. He's sharing targets in a very bad offense. But honestly, I think maybe you have a little more upside now that you have Andy Dalton than Bryce Young, because we've seen what this offense looks like with Bryce Young. This offense is absolute garbage with Bryce Young. Maybe it's still garbage with Andy Dalton, but maybe it's not. It can't get any worse than what it's been. Zamir White's been a running back that's done absolutely nothing. We actually saw that this team had to abandon the run last week. But this week, I actually think that Zamir White is in a much better situation. And you know what I'm going to do? There's no way going up against Carolina we can have Zamir White this low. I think I would actually play Zamir over Carson Steele. I'm going to move Zamir White up to 48 in these rankings. Yeah, like this is such a good spot against the Carolina Panthers. Alexander Madison actually didn't have that large of a role last week. It does look like Zamir is expanding. Our next guy will be Rome Odunze. With Rome, we want to see the step forward from Kayla, but I think he does have upside, especially if you were to have no Keenan Allen. And then last but not least, we'll have Zeke, Javonte, Jerry Jeudy. Maybe we can throw Christian Kirk here as well, but none of these guys are players that I'd be excited to start. I mean, I'm most excited to see what the role looks like for Ezekiel Elliott, because we haven't seen the Cowboys play a close game either this season. And in the case of Javonte Williams, I'm very confident that Javonte's the starter in Denver based off the usage that we had last week. Now, the issue, of course, is the Denver Broncos is just one of the worst offenses in the NFL. So it's very difficult to start anybody here, very similar to what we've talked about with some of these other teams. But I think that's all I have for you. I really hope that I was able to help you out and you're able to get something from this. Subscribe if you play fantasy football. And of course, if you wanted to check out any of those pick'ems, you can find that link to Underdog Fantasy in the description, in the comment section. Code FLOCK will hook you up with a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you'll get that free team review through flockfantasy.com. On top of that, you'll get the free CeeDee Lamb and free Patrick Mahomes picks, more than less than half a total yard for Sunday. But thank you again. Really do appreciate you. Really hope you have a great day, and hope we get to check your team out in the live stream later tonight.